that research Consumer Reports does? Can you go on the internet and get reviews? Is there a way to find out if a car is actually good before you purchase it? And that's something really that's insignificant importance to drugs. So the need is much less. So do you think the free market put something there for the purchase of a car when almost every car is really relatively decent to cars that were made back in the 60s and 70s? All car companies make better cars today. Yet we still want the best. So because there's a demand, there's a Consumer Reports Agency. You don't think something would replace the FDA? Something like that? And you could argue, well, but they could get bought out by particular drug companies. And that's absolutely true. And you don't think the same thing can happen with the FDA? Just because they're a government agency, they can't get bought by drug companies? They can't get paid off? The difference is we can't replace the FDA. We can replace the free market version of the FDA. If they get bought out by a company and the first time that information becomes public, nobody's going to use them. We're all going to demand their competition. And then their competition is going to know they became the premier source of information for drug efficacy and safety because they're replacing a company that took a payoff. So they'll now be more motivated themselves to not take a payoff. And if they do make that same mistake, we can replace them. My point isn't that the free market replacement is perfect. My point is that it's better than the FDA. There is also one very important aspect to this, and that's it's called the classic seen versus unseen. You know, you hear the tiny limited success stories that the FDA has, which are few and far between, if any at all. What you don't hear is the FDA is actually responsible for killing way more people than it could ever hope to save. And let me explain. If you're filing for a new life-saving drug, let's say you've got this great new cancer medicine, it has to go through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, and it takes years and years and millions of dollars to get that through those phase 1 and 2, 3 clinical trials. Not to say that drugs shouldn't go through some clinical trial, but if you've got a life-saving drug for drugs for people that are dying that are dying anyway, wouldn't it make sense to just go ahead and use it and do the clinical trials simultaneously? Why not do the clinical trials on people if it's in a situation where they have no hope? But today you can't do that. So, and the FDA regulator, if before they approve or disapprove a drug, if there's, let's say it's a life-saving drug, and they're not quite sure yet, or 100% convinced, which way are they more apt to go? To postpone approval and await more data, or go ahead and approve and see what happens? Even if it's a life-saving drug, they're going to postpone. Their career depends on them not approving something that's dangerous. How many people die in that postponement phase? And this is real. They're real numbers out there. Nobody calculates them, nobody figures them out, but it's thousands and thousands of people. So you're going to hear about the one instance where, 32 kids died because of this, and that's not to say that won't happen. What I'm saying is you're not going to see the unseen, the thousands and thousands of people that die when there's a new drug available, but it hasn't made it through phase 1 clinical trial yet. So that's kind of my spiel on the FDA. There's one more thing I wanted to add. The other thing that you don't really see, and I do see because I work in a drug company, is the actual cost that the FDA puts in our medical, in your medical and my medical costs, because probably over 50% of the people that work at my company, and there's a lot, there's 1,000 anyway, and in the industry itself, there's hundreds of thousands of people that work in the drug industry. Over 50% of them are there because of the FDA. They're QA, quality assurance, QC, quality control. They're validation personnel. They're documentation specialists, And all of this is just to be in compliance with the FDA. And not to say that you don't need some degree of compliance, but I can tell you for a fact, it's gotten to the point where compliance is overdone. We spend way too much money in compliance. So that $150,000 that we're charging this poor hunter kids every year, over $75,000 of that is just in compliance costs. It has nothing to do with manufacturing the drug. It has nothing to do with transportation or research and development costs. It has to do with compliance. It is a huge burden on the industry. So if you could take 50% of all the drug companies' cost, and it's huge. Drug companies have this view as being the big evil, corporate giants that they are. 50% of their cost comes from compliance. If you could remove that, 50% of all drug companies' cost, how many people could you insure with that money? How many lives could be saved? How many drugs could be actually produced for free? Point being, how much could your Lipitor actually cost? And how many more patients could be treated? How much cheaper would insurance be? How much more available would insurance be to the masses if there was no such thing as these compliance costs? And it's huge. And that compliance cost isn't just in drugs. It's in hospitals. It's in everything. A huge amount of cost is in compliance. It's just in making, the government being assured that everything's okay. We shouldn't have to assure the government. We should have to assure the people. We should assure the customer. And that cost comes in proof. So that cost would come in them proving to you that there's efficacy, not to the government. So that's kind of my spiel on the FDA. Jim Fisher signing off for The Third Way.